Abarera Legos Ram Ori Banish C10 Demonio Dinaja 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 Abarera Legos Ram Abarera, Legos, Rambori, Banish, Satan, Demonio, Dinaja, 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 Abarera, Legos, Rambori, Abarera Legos Ram Ori Banish C10 Demonio Dinaja Abarera Legos Ram Ori Banish C10 Demonio Dinaja Abarera Legos Ram Ori Banish C10 Demonio Dinaja.
Hello, hello, hello. How is it going? Welcome to Apocrypha, the only Apocrypha. I keep forgetting that I don't have like a fancy transition anymore. It's just like boom, there, we're
Right.
here, we're here now. Um, welcome. It's good to see everybody. Maeve, Sad World. How's it going? I'd say two pondering pagans, but I mean he's kind of over. I mean it's weird because he's over here. There he is, right there. So
Rook is
good
right
to see
there.
everybody.
Can't see him.
Yeah, well, we can never see Rook. I mean, I think Rook's been on the show, what, 4 times?
I've been telling him to start getting because he has a pair of these now too. I said you gotta, hop on with us sometime.
Yeah, he should. It'd be good. It'd be good to get his input, on stuffs. But, it is what it is. But anyway, welcome everybody. Welcome to Apocrypha. So let's see. Tonight's topic. Let me just pull this up. Where'd it go? Here, say that for me.
The Art of Sacrificium, understanding symbolic and non-literal sacrifice in advanced rituals.
Yes. And I added practice into the description because I wanted to talk about just kind of like general kind of occult practice. So
See what I did?
yeah, I mean, but before we get into that, as we always do, right, we are going to have our decks read by Mystic, the deck reader.
And we are going traditional decks.
Really?
Yep.
So
Traditional today.
Oh, is that more?
One of the traditionals. It is.
Nice.
Yes, I have not used this. I don't know if I've ever used this on stream, but yeah.
I don't think so.
Morgan Gria. This is actually Rook's favorite deck ever. It's one of mine.
Oh, when did y'all start?
So there's a lot of different takes on the traditional, and I call them traditional. Basically, your rider weight, your rider, or any of the specific runoffs of those. Morgan Greer to me is right next to one of the originals, right? They've stayed really true to the imagery. It's a little bit, to me, it's a little easier to read with. It's a little bit more contrasted and borderless. Big fan. And you can get different types of print of the Morgan Greer too, which is kind of nice. If you have a mini one, a large one, you can get it at a 10. You can get it with better card stock. So there's more than just one version of the Morgan Greer that you can get. So we're going to do our read. See what we get. Holy, okay. Our first card is Strength. I'm a big fan of the Strength card, and the Strength card is really focusing on a certain kind of strength, not just any strength right now. It's asking us to be string. Be very string today.
Be stringy.
Be strong, but don't forget that strength doesn't mean be an ass. There's a kindness that makes strength even more than it is. So you may be coming across a situation or something that's happening, and it requires strength, but you have to do it in a kind way, deliver it in a kind way so that it's accepted and somebody can learn from it. This isn't the just run in guns blazing and take everything out kind of strength. This is that um, I might be afraid of you, like maybe I'm afraid of the lion in the image here, but the right thing to do is to help. So I'm going to put my fears away and be strong and help or do this thing, whatever it is I'm trying to do, despite the potential negative outcomes that could happen. So this is strength. Another way to say it is strength in adversity. So having the courage to be strong and move forward on something, even if it's difficult. Our second card is the Hierophant. Now, I'm not a fan of the Hierophant. This is one of my least favorite cards in the deck. Granted, you're not supposed to have favorites, but it's the case. And I know it can mean a lot of things, but for me, the Hierophant shows up when somebody's being overbearing, or they're forcing you to try to think or see something in a certain way that's their way, and it doesn't mean it's right. So pay attention to people who are trying to guide you specifically into doing something in a very, very specific way. And your way is different. Your way is fine. It doesn't have to change. And the Hierophant does also come into our life when we need to be focused on the things that we need to learn that are, what's the word, specific, organized, they are set, I should say. So there's a chance that somebody's trying to teach you something that does have to be done in a certain way, but generally speaking, you're going to get this idea that it has to be this way and it's the only right way, and it's usually religious based too, right? So somebody is trying to push this narrative in the atmosphere of our environment right now. We just have to make sure we stay to our own truth and stay to our own system of knowledge with this, and then pay attention to what's going on. Last card is the Eight of Rods, or sticks, or wands. And so interesting that we're going from two major arcana to a minor arcana. We're also talking about a part of the wands that for me is later in the game or later in the cycle of things that are happening. So we're in the edge of burnout of something. So all of these other cards, finding strength and courage and making sure that you are doing and being strong but not overbearing, and being kind while you're also helping. And the Hierophant being present with the Seven of Wands is telling me that we're getting to a burnt out stage. Somebody's yapping at something in our back pocket and they won't shut up about something, and we need to cut them loose. Not something huge. So the big takeaway for me in these three cards is that we're on the right track of doing what we need to do, and somebody else is trying to get in the way of that. Probably or likely to be work related, but not necessarily required to be work related. But there's some things going on in the background that aren't very appropriate or very good, and we have to make sure that we do approach it with some finesse and unwavering. Do not change what we think is the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. So that is this week's energy read. Pay attention. There's some asses around somewhere.
Yeah, there's always asses around somewhere, isn't there? It is just
Sad
kind
world.
of.
Here's money.
Yeah, right. Here's money. Love you all. Thank you very much, Sad World. Greatly appreciate it. Right. Everything helps the channel. So regarding tonight's topic, sacrifices. Non-literal sacrifices. So we're not talking about
Literal but non-physical.
Yeah, like not the physical type of sacrifices. So we're not talking about any bloodletting. We're not talking about killing a chicken, or really even
Killing babies.
or even leaving flowers or food or things of that nature, right? We're talking more kind of metaphorical sacrifices in the craft, right, that are done during ritual. So I think to open up this topic, I think the best person to go with is going to be Daira. So, how would you break it down for us and everyone else on your perspective and what your definition of like kind of like, you know, non-physical sacrifices in ritual and practice?
So, sacrifice has always been quite a big thing for me in my path. I was once in a church shop and I picked up this random book which was about it was called How the Saints Fought Satan or something. And I read the bit on the back and it said, we all know that the path to heaven is narrow, but the path to hell is wide. And at first, you know, my initial sort of thoughts on that was fuck off. But then once I removed the dogma from it, I looked at it very differently. And it's the path to suffering is wide and the path to peace is narrow. And what I mean by that is the path to, you know, our own personal heaven and hell, if we want to put it like that. I prefer to say suffering and peace, because that's what that looks like for me. And the reality is that I've had to sacrifice a lot for my peace. So what does this look like? I have sacrificed people, not in that way. I have surrendered my connections, relationships with people that weren't meant to be. I've sacrificed behaviors which were, you know, holding me back from my sort of spiritual evolution. You know, I've been very open online about certain aspects of that, especially when it comes to addiction. So, yeah, I mean, the road has got narrower for me. It's not just the kind of obvious things like, you know, giving up substances. It's giving up behaviors. It's giving up the patterns that I have been in for most of my life and doing things differently. And that initial sacrifice is very painful, because, you know, our habits and our behaviors they're often safety seeking. So when without them, we can feel pretty unsafe. And there's also a grieving process involved in that. But nonetheless, all of that has been, to me, a sacrifice. It's always had meaning to it. And it's not just about, oh, you know, this isn't good for me anymore. It's an offering to my path. It's an offering to what I work with, because it's an offering to that higher message that they give me during divination, phonosis, and things like that. And yeah, I don't know. That's about it that I've have to open with. Really, it's definitely been a massive thing for me.
Yeah, I even think like for me, like I mean, there's a certain level of like kind of sacrificing the comfort of doing things the way that like to doing them in ritual, like opening yourself to kind of like trying something different to get the right vibration going through like what it is that you're trying to do. And that's something that's really hard to do, right? Is, you know, taking something that you're comfortable with in a system that you're comfortable working in, and then trying to do something completely different, you know, to get that response that like you want to get that gnosis that you want, or that you need. Also, I think the biggest thing that can be sacrificed, you know, I think this is literal and metaphorical, is time. Like, you know, taking the time to, you know, do the work and maybe not getting a response. I mean, I know, like, you know, I know I don't talk about my work with Baphomet as much as people probably wish that I did. And I think I might, you know, start kind of diving into that more in depth. But the biggest thing with working with Baphomet was time. It was there was like without question. I mean, there was easily, you know, a whole year, 2 years working with him that, you know, I didn't get anything significant in return for the time and the effort. At least starting out with it. And then it just kind of like the walls kind of broke through, right? It's kind of like showing that you really want that relationship with that entity to work. And the greatest thing that us as finite beings can sacrifice, especially when we talk about ritual and practice, is our time. There really isn't a greater thing that we can sacrifice. So Mystic, what about you?
So, I guess when I think about sacrifice, um, I I think of what part of, well, first of all, it's always, sacrifice for me is always internal, and we've talked about this before. It has to be something that I have to give. It's not, I can't sacrifice somebody else's something, because that's no sacrifice for me, right? That's donation. So thinking of it in that aspect, I kind of see it as, you know, things that are a sacrifice at one point aren't necessarily always going to be a sacrifice. When we talk in terms of certain things right now that we feel we want to let go of on a personal level, we sacrifice those things to grow and to move forward. And then years later, that's not a sacrifice. I sacrificed it at the time. It was a huge sacrifice. It was a huge give. But now it's nothing to me. And that alchemization, I think, of what it was to what it is part of how we grow. When we talk about sacrifice to like our deity or to our evocations or our workings, it's almost to me is like a proof to yourself that it's important enough. It's like saying, I will give everything up to get to here because this is who and where I need to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's kind of those two different places, but sacrifice for me is always, no matter how you look at it, for me, it's clearing a path. That's what it is. I'm either sacrificing something of my own to clear a path, to work on myself through shadow work, or I'm working with Cornunos and I'm making sacrifices to represent my knowledge of my connection to him and to the woodland creatures, right? And that sacrifice is something that's done in order to sustain me. That's a whole nother situation, right? So either way, like I said, it's just it's a. I never think of where a lot of people go because they see the blood and glory, I think, of sacrificing things, and I can't sacrifice somebody else's life. Not possible. It's not a sacrifice anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get the. Yeah, I can definitely. I mean, I definitely get the vibe with that one. I mean, I do think that. Okay, so maybe an unpopular opinion here, but I do think that there is power in what would be considered kind of like that level of, I guess you consider that blood magic, I suppose, like the sacrifice of like a living creature inside of a ritual. You know, I do think that there is like, you know, a release of energy that can be harnessed and used at the moment of that sacrifice or that bloodletting or whatever term you want to use.
Yeah, I mean, people would have never done it if they didn't think it worked. So,
Yeah, but I think
Do you,
with
do you think that come? Do you think that comes from the sacrifice though, or the belief of the person that it's valuable?
that's an
I think that
interesting point because recently there someone sent me an interview done with S. Connolly on
Hmm.
and she spoke about blood offerings and she said it's all purely psychological, and I have to disagree with that. I think there are so many more aspects to blood magic than the psychological, with like the amount of history on it, the amount of different cultures and traditions that use it in different ways. I think there's just too much to it for it to be purely psychological. Just based on like what I've read and seen of it.
hmm yeah, I mean, me personally, I mean, I'm not, I'm not biting off chicken heads or anything like that, in ritual. It's not my cup of tea. Uh, but I mean, I do think that there's something to it. Would I partake in it? No, I wouldn't. But I think that comes down to the practitioner. I do also kind of want to talk about here, kind of echoing off of what Dyra initially started talking about, kind of like the sacrifice of kind of like habit and addiction, things of that nature. In the left hand path, we understand and we know that we, as through self deification of the left hand path, understand that the greatest power that we have is our own ability to control our own lives. Sometimes when we talk about the art of sacrifice, we're talking about the necessity to sacrifice aspects of like ourselves that are detrimental to who we are, that are hurting us. So if you do suffer from addiction, if you do suffer from, certain behavioral patterns, that you are aware of and that you are capable of, putting in check, or even if you're not, even like I would go as far as saying that going to therapy could be considered, an aspect of sacrifice, to assist yourself in the ability of sacrificing this aspect of yourself that know no longer serves you, right? To equip yourself with better tools and better coping methods, to grow in that way. I would say that in the left-hand path, that is an extremely important aspect of sacrifice, is to be able to step up and say, okay, I need to change this part of myself. I need this needs to change, not for my mother, not for my brother, not for my partner, but for me, because this no longer serves me. And I have spent years with this as a crutch, as a negative coping method. It is something that has brought me down, and I have noticed that it is bringing me down. And in ritual, to say you can bring into ritual those aspects of things, like when we talk about therapy, when we talk about sacrificing certain aspects of ourselves and our behaviors, you can bring that into ritual, right? The aspects that you're bringing into therapy, because if there's one thing through the left-hand path that I understand, and inside of what my understanding of demonolatry is, when working with entities like Lucifer and Lilith, King Paimon, Belial especially, there is a level of appreciation when you have the ability to say, I want change, I want progress, I want growth, I want gnosis, but I have this wall that I have constructed that is stopping me from being able to obtain these things. And though through ritual we can remove a lot of these walls. Sometimes taking that step outside of ritual, outside of practice, is equally as important to your practice as the practice itself. If that makes any sense. Mystic, what do you think?
I mean, that's a lot to unpack. Um,
Well, then unpack it. We got
I do
time.
kind of see, yeah. So I kind of see it as perhaps maybe just going back to the therapy discussion a little bit too. The sacrifice of time back to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because you're the center of what it is that's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're the linchpin in your world. So if I sacrifice to a deity, or if I'm sacrificing to any of the kings that you listed, or what have you, right? My hope on the other side of that is to better myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that in effect is the same thing. It's a sacrifice of time to myself being part of the world, which is also to the world, right? Because that is one of the biggest things you can give when you're looking at things for me, from a ritual or spiritual perspective. So I think when you talk about it psychologically, it's a little bit different, because the end result is more ability to do more of the things you're trying to do. I don't know how to say it in better words.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're in essence, the whole goal of any of it is to be a better you, individual. Whether it's psychotherapy, whether it's self work, shadow work, ritual, working with deities, or whatever. It's the end goals are ultimately still the same bucket, right? It's to try to know more, learn more, do more, be better, feel better, and all the things that we're giving is the time. Whether you, like you said earlier, whether it's an animal. uh, my reasoning for dislike of animal sacrifice is, the purpose for me has to be more than just the sacrifice, right? There has to be I need, whether it's hunger or food or whatever. There's reasonings for that, but yeah, I'm getting off topic, but but it all does go back to the same thing. It all goes back to, my goal here is to improve my life, and in effect improve the world, because my life has improved. My life has improved because I have sacrificed my time to better myself and stop wasting time, like with drugs or addictions. And I'm no longer giving those things over to stealing my time from me, so that I can then take that energy and do other things. And it's different for everybody. I do think sacrifice might be a word that we're using liberally, in the discussion, from more of a psychological standpoint than what most people want. Like, oh, sacrifice, that brings in a lot of people because they want to hear about it, right? Because that's the demonic thing that we all do.
Right.
Slaughterhouse murder of animals for our food is way worse to me than a sacrifice for a ritual that we are going to eat and use. Would be way more meaningful. And
I
again,
agree.
side subject.
Yeah,
Just, I don't know, the
people.
value in that is so different.
A lot of people kind of flip their shit when it comes to like animal sacrifice and stuff, and it's like, well, you can't really flip your shit over it if you eat them anyway. And the animal is far more respected in a ritual sacrifice than any of your food is. And if you watch footage of animals being killed in a slaughterhouse compared to if it exists ritual footage of animals being sacrificed, you'll see that the animals in ritual are a lot calmer and not fighting when they are being killed, which I think is interesting. I think that has a lot to do with the energy of the ritual, personally. So yeah, when I also just think there's a level of ignorance as well when it comes to animal sacrifice. Like people don't understand, like especially in like the West, when it comes to like how different cultures do things, and how you can't really like yeah, sure you can have you can have an opinion on anything, sure, but you have to understand that there's a lot that you don't know when it comes to other practices.
Yeah. It just, and I've known this. This is not like eye-opening, but it reminds me of some conversation I had a long time ago about how because we used to do this all the time where I live. I grew up in Virginia, and our neighborhood was two streets in the middle of the country, and one family, in June would do it, one family in August, one family in October would have a pig roast. We talked about this earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That is a ritual sacrifice.
Hmm.
The community is coming together to cook the pig as a group to socialize and eat, and that it looks different. So why people? Well, we know why people run straight to. I'm not going to give any visuals, but to what they're really thinking of when they talk about sacrifice
Yep.
and they see in the movies. That's not what's happening. When that stuff does happen, that's completely different. That's something else to me. And we're not saying go out and start ritually killing animals. It's at least think about the level of cognitive dissonance and being mad about that versus, having a backyard roast.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well, I think
So,
I think one of the things that all of this kind of comes down to, and I think kind of Mystic kind of brushed over the top of it. You know, when we go into ritual and we decide that we want to remove something from our lives, because we're not talking about like Lent, right? Like we're not talking about like the Christians giving up meat for no apparent fucking reason whatsoever and only eating fish on Fridays just because, right? Some other people went through some shit. That always confuses shit out of me. And the fish that they eat on Fridays is always horrible. It's very fishy fish. But I think the important aspect of any sacrifice we make, whether it be non-physical, metaphorical, or even physical, is the intent behind the sacrifice. What is the intent behind the sacrifice? Why is this thing being let go of? Why are we moving on from this? Why are we considering this a sacrifice? Why is it important for us to sacrifice this thing? Why is it important for us to give time? What is the intent of the time that you are spending on the thing that you're doing? What is the intent? We know magic revolves around intent. And it is something that bleeds through, no pun intended, everything that we do. Everything we do in the occult, in our spiritual practices, revolves around our intent. Why? The question why. Doesn't matter really how, doesn't really matter, when. The question is why. Why are you doing it? Right? If you're giving something up, like one of the things that kind of irritated me for like, like Lent, at least my experience with Lent, was people would find one thing that they would give up for a week. They would sacrifice it for a week, right? So they would stop drinking soda for a week, or they would stop smoking for a week, or, just something stupid and ridiculous. They would just give it up for 1 week. And the problem was the only intent that they had behind it was because the church said that they should do it. There's no
is it
intent
really
for...
a sacrifice?
Hmm?
Is it really a sacrifice if they know they're going to start it back up in a week? That's not a sacrifice.
No, it's not. That's the thing, right? I mean, but that was the
Point
whole...
out.
Yeah. I mean, but that was like kind of like the whole thing, right? Is they would give up this thing for like, well, I'm going to stop doing this thing for a week. I'm going to stop saying fuck for a week. I mean, and it's like,
Yeah.
there's now, don't misunderstand me. Like maybe there's something that you want to try to experiment getting rid of. Like let's say quitting smoking, right? We know everybody knows quitting smoking is a bitch, right? And maybe that week in Lent is enough motivation for you to sit there and say, I'm going to use this as the excuse to kind of, you know, kick off me quitting smoking, but the idea that I can start up again in a week, you know, might help me kind of alleviate some of the stress for this week that I'm going to be going through without a cigarette. Okay, fine. And then with that, you can instill intent that you're doing it for your health, the betterment of your health. But some of the stuff is just ridiculous, right? There's no intent behind it, and without intent, what's the point of doing it?
I think when it comes to Christianity, there can be a kind of over sacrifice there, and I'm not talking about, you know, your typical lukewarm Christians. I'm talking about sort of like hardcore Catholics. You know, think about how much a monk or a nun sacrifices to dedicate their life to God, to Christ. So there's that. And what is that? That's slavery. You are giving up having a normal human life. However, just because this is, I'm talking in terms of Christianity, this doesn't mean that we can't fall into this in the left-hand path as well. I have fallen into it. In fact, what I work with are kind of pushing me away from sacrifice at the moment because I need to actually give more to myself. We can really easily fall into over-sacrificing when we see so much value in it. And yeah, there is value in it, but something that Belial once said to me was like, you don't need to be suffering to be productive, because what we can fall into on the left-hand path is that, okay, I'm not going through an alchemical process if I'm not suffering, and that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
We are still meant to enjoy our lives. We are still meant to have a relatively normal life, whatever that looks like to you. We're not meant to be sacrificing all the time. So that's a whole other thing as well. But sort of becoming addicted to suffering in a way, like becoming a little bit of a masochist. That's definitely something that's happened to me a few times on my path. Like I remember when I was on prep for bodybuilding, and I was constantly thinking, you know, the higher purpose, the higher goal of all of it, and the intent behind it. I was sort of trying to use my own left-hand path philosophies to get me through it, in the sense of like, you know, this is like temporary suffering in the, you know, trying to pursue a bigger goal. But the more I went into it, it was like the less I cared about the bigger goal, because, you know, I was getting physically ill. I was in emotional and mental distress. It got to a point where I started fucking hallucinating, and it got to the point where it's like, what is the genuine, incredible outcome that I want from this? Because there doesn't seem to be anything on the other side of the door, and there wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I mean by over-sacrificing, especially if you are quite an ambitious person or a perfectionist. I would say that you are vulnerable to that over sacrifice, and it's like there's a happy medium. You don't want your sacrifice to become slavery, because then you're just completely missing the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can completely jive with that. I completely agree. I think these aren't necessarily rules, but I would say things to look at when considering, you know, using some level of sacrifice in practice is obviously, what is it that you're going to be sacrificing? Because the what leads to the intent, right? So what is it that you're sacrificing? Then why are you sacrificing it? Like what is the intent for the sacrifice? Right? What is to come of it? What is on the other side of this? Right? I think that those are two kind of like major pillar stones or cornerstones in the process to take into consideration. And then also how are you going to sacrifice this, right? Is how you're going to sacrifice this thing healthy for you, right? Because if you're going to sacrifice something, in such a way that it isn't healthy for you, then you probably shouldn't do it, right? One of the things that I always found kind of ridiculous is like, I mean, I've only ever seen it in movies, but I know it's in movies because it has existed. There have been people that have been so holy that they've gone to this level, but like like self-harm to the point like when certain priests or certain clergymen in the priesthood thought that they had sinned, they would give themselves lashes on their back. They would take a cat of nine, nine tails, cat of nine tails, yeah, and they would whip themselves on the back, while reciting prayer, because they believed that they sinned and they believed that they need to suffer for that sin, and that's what made them, holy. That's what brought them closer to God. And I think that to take your sacrifice and implement it in such a way that would bring harm to you, physically or emotionally, I think defeats the purpose of the intent of a sacrifice, of at least of the nature that we're speaking of. Mystic, I mean, what do you think?
I think there's a very, very fine difference between the two phrases or statements. Sacrifice should hurt a little, and sacrifice is synonymous with self-harm. Those are so close because,
Yeah.
And the difference for me is the level of, when I sacrifice something, I do feel like there should be, I want to say it should hurt. And I'm going kind of following a couple of things that were said in chat too, which I really agree with. It's not so much that it should hurt, but it should feel like I'm losing, like something has changed or been pulled away, or there's a negative space created for me, so that I can fill it with something else better. That's what I look for when I'm talking about sacrificing and of self. But going to the level like we were just talking about, where we're harming ourselves, to me is, I mean, it's almost egotistical to think that you're gonna solve anything by, so it's like two negatives are not a positive in this case. You know what I mean? It's just, it's hard to explain. It's so to me, again, opinion, it's so misguided that to be at that level means that I might have fundamentally misunderstood what it means to sacrifice to do better, and it's hurtful. And I can't think, even from a Christian perspective, like I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think God would ever want us to hurt our own flesh. That's probably a much bigger, bad thing to do than it is to just, you know what, I fucked up, I'm going to do better. You don't have to hurt yourself to paying for your sins. That's kind of like I don't want to say the easy way, but kind of the easy way.
Yeah, and one thing I want to interject here, though, is because I know that there are going to be some people that may watch this later and say, well, because they see that all of us have tattoos. It's like, well, Mystic is talking about not hurting the flesh, and, we all have tattoos.
Well, this doesn't hurt. This hurts so good.
I define a
very... itching right now.
I mean, getting a tattoo, yes, it does hurt in the moment that you're getting it, but I think that there's a difference in it because you're creating art.
Yeah, there's absolutely a sacrifice in getting a tattoo. Absolutely. Like, that sacrifice is clear. But
that reminded me of... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it reminded me of something I was actually trying to say a minute ago, and I think I lost in the conversation, is, or in myself, is the level of pain when you know it's temporary and going to end, to me takes away the the psychological, this is a problem, this is an issue. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just makes it a different thing. So I think people do say that. I think people do think, when you tattoo yourself, you're self-harming, or you're harming your flesh or your skin, and that's obviously a perspective. But just like we said earlier, when you're giving up something in Lent for a week, when I get a tattoo, the pain's temporary, but it's a permanent change, and it's a change that I welcome and enjoy and enriches my life. So that temporary exchange is a sacrifice. It's pain that's creating a space for me to put something to me more valuable back in its spot. My skin, my pain has now happened, and now in its place, I have a valuable piece of my personal history that when I see it, I think of those things that surrounded that particular piece of ink. And so that value of this 2-inch piece of skin has completely changed based on a temporary sacrifice.
Were you going to say that?
I wish I could say that in a shorter way.
I was going to say that I think that there's a level of safeguarding that needs to be applied to sacrifice, because I'll use the example of fasting. Some people are perfectly able to fast. Like, some people find fasting really helpful for ritual or just for general clarity, and just, as a spiritual thing. With someone who has an eating disorder, for example, they could easily go into it with the intent of like, yeah, I want to do this for that purpose, like a completely innocent intention. But, say you're fasting for a week, 3 days in, your head's going to be a mess because you've set that pattern off again. So it's about knowing yourself when it comes to sacrifice. What can and can't you do? What's going to help you, not harm you?
I was also curious about you're going to say something about tattoos. That tattoos are definitely a sacrifice, and I was curious what thoughts on that were.
Well, just like what Mystic said, really, it's like the temporary pain, and you know what the outcome's going to be from it, and you're going to walk away and think like, yeah, that looks fucking great.
I mean, even down to also another thing I think maybe we should kind of talk about at a future episode is kind of using that alchemy of
giving birth would be an example.
Of putting a tattoo on your skin and then using sigils on your body. And I do believe that there is power in that. It's one of the reasons why I do want to get sigils tattooed on me. I do think that there is a certain level of, connection that is elevated, when you tattoo a certain entity's essentially name on you. You brand yourself to that entity. And I think that might be an interesting conversation to kind of carry maybe next week, to kind of talk about, how that plays a role. But I think that, body modification, tattoos, things like that, there's definitely something spiritual to it. It's one of the reasons, besides the fact that I think aesthetically it looks good, it's one of the reasons I stretched my septum, I enjoyed the pain. I enjoyed the pain of stretching the septum. Yeah, it hurt for a while, as the skin kind of, got used to, that space. But, there's just something about it, that I enjoy. Same thing with tattoos. I do think that it's medically speaking. When you go to a tattoo shop, most tattoo shops are like walking into a hospital. They're clean rooms essentially, right? They're very well kept. So it's not like walking into a potentially dirty ritual room, and pricking your finger or something, or cutting yourself to bloodlet a little bit for a ritual, and then the potential for, infection or something like that. It's very clean. And there's something that comes after it, right? There's a visible change that happens to your body after the tattoo's done. And I think that, a lot of people underestimate, the power of the transformation that happens when getting a tattoo. I mean, Mystic is definitely not one of those people. I think he has more tattoos than most people I know.
Oh yeah, I'm waiting to add more on every time, but every single one of them has a very specific meaning. Like, the tattoo on my arm is the entire cast of a game where each person represents a strength that they didn't know they had and was a part of my life when I was very depressed and very self-unaliving attempting and all those kind of things, and that they remind me each one. There's the robot that learned that she actually had human feelings, and there's the guy that placed no value on himself who became the hero, and the girl who was a priestess singer and learned that she was not religious. So it's all these different people, and each one has a very strong and important meaning to me. And again, the value of the temporary pain and washing and healing,
Mm-hmm.
and that 2-inch piece of skin has a much bigger value now. It has much increased worth to me, and that's what matters. That's
Yeah.
a symbol of a sacrifice.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I think like the big cornerstones that we talked about that kind of always keep in mind to kind of close us out is what it is that you're going to sacrifice, why is it you're going to sacrifice it, and how you're going to sacrifice it. Those are kind of
And
like
is it yours to sacrifice?
right. Is it yours to sacrifice? Right.
Are any of us sacrificing anything at the moment? I'll start. I have deactivated social media, not my business account, but I only access that on the computer now. I don't have social media on my phone. I've deleted TikTok, I've deleted Instagram, I've deleted Facebook, because I was sacrificing too much of my time to scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I haven't put a time limit on it. I haven't said I'll do it for a certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think I need to do that, but I just know that for now,
Mm-hmm.
I need to do that.
Okay. Mystic, what about you?
The biggest thing I think that I'm still there's a lot of things I think I could use here, but I have decided, and this is also something I'm working on, to stop spending so much time being angry at things like my job, because it takes me away from my family for long periods of time, yet it's providing me so much on the other end. And I waste so much time saying, I hate my job, I don't like what I'm doing. I say, well, then fucking change it.
Mm-hmm.
So my current sacrifice is really also time, and that is reorganizing my time and recognizing when I'm wasting it, when it can be better served just sitting by the pool, or
Mm-hmm.
playing a game, or doing something else other than complain. I complain a lot about my job, and I actually do like it, which is the funny part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that vibe. I definitely have something, but I'm not going to talk about it live. And that's just a choice that I'm going to kind of roll with. I don't think it's appropriate to talk about on stream, but there's definitely something that I sacrificed, and dealing with the consequences of that. But I know that it's temporary. I know that on the other side of it, things will be better than they were. But that's all I'm about willing to say about what it is. Those that know,
The end result
know.
is going to be more valuable, right?
What's that?
That the end result is going to have more value in it than it would right now.
Yeah, essentially. So, those that know. Those that don't need to know. So, That being said, thank you all very much. As always, everyone that came out, saw some old faces I haven't seen in a couple weeks, like Tree Sap and Aaron. Good to see you guys. Welcome, welcome. And you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I will be doing Satan and Coffee tomorrow. I will let you guys know if it's going to be the same time or it's going to be earlier, because I know that there's some stuff that we're going to be doing, and I don't know if Satan Coffee is going to conflict with that. So that's a conversation that needs to be had. Chad, thank you very much for subscribing. Greatly appreciate it. Right? The more the merrier. And as always, hail thy fucking self. See you guys in the next one. Peace the fuck out.
Deuces.